Our guest for this podcast is one of the global thought leaders in the coaching and mentoring industry, a multi-billion-pound industry that has created opportunity and challenge in equal measure. Jonathan Passmore is Professor of Coaching and Behavioural Change at Henley Business School and Senior Vice President at EZRA Coaching. Jonathan is also a prolific author, having written over 40 books on coaching and related subjects. He brings a unique and special expertise to understanding the industry and its nuances. He straddles the academic and practitioner worlds, bringing a holistic perspective to key issues. Perspectives that he shares with us in these podcasts as we explore the future of coaching and how artificial intelligence will likely impact it and the millions of coaches around the world. Jonathan observes how coaches need to reinvent themselves in the age of technology, which is revolutionizing the world. He comments on the limited research available to evidence the impact of coaching and how that can be remedied. The discussion also examines why so many coaches do not use psychometric measures, when they are often highly relevant to the coach's work and can add significant value for the client. This is a unique opportunity to listen in to an enlightening discussion. We welcome Jonathan to the Talking Toughness podcast.
Well, welcome, Jonathan. Welcome to our Talking Toughness podcast. I know we're going to have a really interesting discussion. So, shall we kick off with a question about the world of coaching in general? Coaching and mentoring has become a multi-billion pound or dollar industry, but there are lots and lots of good things and lots of things to be concerned about. What's your take on that world?
Well, we've gone in the time that I've been involved in coaching since the late 1990s from something that was just for the elites, the most senior leaders in organizations who probably were thinking that they were seeking a mentor or at least somebody who was a confidant for a sounding board reflective conversation, to a position as you describe now where we have maybe 500,000, maybe 1 million people who are benefiting from coaching through human coaching delivery. And much of that is being delivered through digital coaching. So we've seen a move from face-to-face to digital platforms. So people using Zoom and Google Meets and Teams, but also the emergence of digital coaching platforms like EZRA, BetterUp, Coach Hub. And these organizations have enabled the average manager to then gain access to coaching. But we're also at this moment in time going through an existential threat maybe to human coaches with the emergence of AI, and coach bots, I guess, is one thing that is shaking up the coaching market, just as maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago, digital platforms shook up the coaching market. And I guess it's difficult to predict where we're going to end up. One positive could be that we truly democratize coaching, that we make through AI tools added to your smartphone the opportunity that coaching is not just available for 1 million managers in the Microsofts, Googles and Ubers of the world, that it becomes available to the small entrepreneur in South Sudan or the mum in Ethiopia or on South Africa who wants to have a reflective conversation, because it will be available 24/7 and at a price point that human coaches are not able to deliver a reflective conversation at. So there's some great positives from AI, but there are also some really great threats to the existence of human coaches. So I've compared that potential threats to the arrival of the motor car. And if you were driving a horse and cart at the turn of the previous century, 1900, what's going to happen to you? Well, horses and carts carried on to maybe the 1950s and 1960s, but they were continuing to diminish. I don't know anybody who has a horse and cart now, but I know a lot of people who have cars. So how do human coaches need to reinvent themselves in the age of technology that is revolutionizing the world? And there are clearly ways that they can do that. And maybe we'll pick up some of those in the conversation. Some of the other threats are about IP, ethics, and the quality of the conversation one can have. And I've often described, at least for the moment, AI coaching tools as being short and shallow. So they might help you to come up with a specific action, often based on its own advice. Is it really coaching? There's a question mark about that, because often the tools are stepping in, generating content. And I think the other aspect is of concern is we're not exploring the diversity that we have in our population. So if you're a Muslim or a Christian, you might want to bring your faith into that conversation, because your philosophy, your values, your principles are informed by your faith. And an AI bot won't pick those aspects up. Also, how we might operate in, I don't know, Scunthorpe might be very different to how you might operate in Saudi Arabia. Or if you are in, Limerick, the way that you might operate in Lima may be different. So thinking about cultural context is important. And the last aspect I just touch upon is about our lived experience. That AI is fabulous at bringing everything together to provide a homogenized solution that fits many. But it's like those t-shirts that are one size fits all. You go in, and I describe them as one size fits no one, because there are a few people it does fit, but for most of us, it's not quite, their sleeves are not quite right, or the length of it's not right, or the body shape is not right for us. And in a way, we all bring our uniqueness, and a human coach is very able to tap into that uniqueness, or at least a good human coach is. So we need to think about how we dial up those aspects before we find that the human coach is replaced by low-cost, 24/7 available AI. So those are some of the things that we're facing in the coaching industry. Other things I'm sure we can touch upon: measurement, science, evidence, pretty lacking, even though we're 30 years in. We could talk lots about coach training and ethical practice. But so lots to explore.
Yeah, we might have to introduce this as part 1 of 19 of the conversation with Jonathan, because some great points there, and I love the existential conversations, because you say like 30 years in, which is young still, and I'm interested in, as Doug knows, I'm always banging on about kind of nuance and detail, and I'm a psychologist. I'm interested in kind of just trying to dig deeper and deeper and deeper, and really trying to unpick some of those small things. And I suppose one of my fears, and I'd be interested to know if you can tell me if it's completely unfounded or not. And certainly looking at when some students have handed me work that's used AI, is it can become quite toolkitty. It can become quite
Lego.
I'll give you a simple answer to a really complicated question. Because it just keeps going on with what's likely to be the next word until it runs out of words. So whereas my response, a coach's response, a therapist's response, a lot of the time when someone goes, "Oh, why is that? Tell me more about that." ChatGPT never, when I put something in there, it doesn't give me this short, right, expand on that. So is there the potential that, as brilliant as it would be for more people who previously coaching might be inaccessible to engage in it, but how do we manage to go like, but that's not all coaching is, right? Coaching can be richer and deeper than that.
Absolutely right. So it's an algorithm that adds the next word. And I compare it to, and I mentioned Lego. When you and I were children, you used to get a box of Lego, and there were all the colors there and different sizes of bricks, but there were no instructions.
Yeah.
And so every day you built something new. Often you didn't quite finish it. So the houses didn't have roofs, because like, how did you do that roofy thing? And if you were lucky, you did have some windows, but maybe you only built a particular type of house, and you only had a limited number of wheels. So you could only have a car rather than a lorry. But you were using your imagination, and every build was unique. Having got children, having got 2 girls, they too loved Lego, and so we would buy Lego for them. And what they particularly liked was the Friends Lego. They loved it, and it comes with all of the right pieces and an instruction kit, and you build it, and then you put it on the shelf.
Yeah.
You stop playing with it. Or maybe you play with the little bits, but it's a different experience. You're not continually bringing your creativity. You're not recreating and then playing with the thing and taking it apart and playing with it. And that has gone from the way that Lego is consumed or played with today. And the analogy is human coaching is a continual, fresh, new, unique conversation for that human being. The AI generated conversation, even though it might have value, and I'm not dismissing it as having no value, and not dismissing it as not having a coaching, just as Lego Friends is play, it's just a different type of conversation and develops a different type of skill. And what you end up with is the Friends Lego to put on your shelf, a statue, whereas you put everything away, your mum comes in and says, pack it all up now, and you put it back in the box, and then the next day you get it out and spread it over the carpet and start completely afresh. And I wonder how, because generative AI, as you rightly say, John, is about generating content. What it doesn't do is hold the silence. What it doesn't do is reflect back the word, the phrase. Tell me more about that. Interesting. What did you mean by that? And pick into the words that people use, encourage them to go deeper in the semantics of their conversation, and so then think freshly in new ways to develop those new insights. But I wonder what general AI might offer us. There is discussion that 12 or 18 months time, we might have AGI, and that then has the capacity, may have the capacity to operate in a very different way.
Interesting, but don't we find we have coaches who are sort of falling into those categories now? There are coaches who really do dig deep, but there's also a lot of coaches who kind of operate in a very superficial way. One group I feel are going to be more threatened than the other, and the other is likely to see more opportunities in AI.
I would totally agree with you. And I think a lot of the claims that have come out about AI is not very good has been saying, well, it doesn't have empathy. It lacks empathy because it's only a machine. Or how could it ever summarize what the person is saying? Actually, the evidence from my experiments suggests that it's fabulous at summarizing. It's better than 99% of coaches. It's better at displaying empathy. It can hear the words that people say and it does play them back. It's really good at being consistent and asking open questions. So in many aspects, it's better than the average coach. People then say, oh, it's got no creativity. Actually, it's highly creative, but it's creative more than 99.9% of the population. What it's not is creative in the way of the 0.1 or the 0.01%, that the creation is a summing together of everything else. Of course, it'd be creative and it can do a cat in the style of Van Gogh. It can do a Cézanne with dogs barking around a tree. It could bring those different styles together, but what it doesn't do is create its own unique style. So that aspect of creativity is missing. But we as humans, it's on an average basis, it is far better than your average person's creativity, better than your average person's questioning, summarizing, or empathetic responses.
I suppose coaching and mentoring is evolving really rapidly. I mean, interesting that you and I first met at UEL at a conference where the keynote speaker was John Whitmore, and he spoke, as he always did, about the GROW model. And I still come across lots and lots and lots of coaches who believe that the GROW model is coaching, but it's a process, and then just put people through a process. Well, AI can do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But in its day, that was a breakthrough. It was getting people to think about, well, there is some sort of method behind coaching, and we're moving beyond that.
Absolutely. I think that the GROW model is fabulous for a process-based transactional conversation, and AI supplants us in that. What it's less good at is the transformational conversation that involves value, culture, context. And it's even less good at conversations that move from transformation into a deeper aspect of our spirituality and our connectedness as humanity. You know, the aspects about our collective unconscious, not the I, but the we coming together. And AI is less able to think about these systemic themes in its conversations that are the transcendental aspect of coaching.
And to sort of change tact a little bit, I was normally, if we get someone on the podcast who's got a book or something, I try and have a look through some of the book and try and pick a few things up. So a couple of weeks ago, I was like, right, I know Jonathan's got a few books out. My God, you've got a library of books, Jonathan. But I come at having that kind of academic background. I'm particularly interested in some of the ones you've got around kind of the research and evidence and stuff like that. You touched on earlier that some of the evidence base is, you know, we'll say burgeoning. Yeah. So one of the conversations I often have is, well, what do we mean by evidence, like informed practice, evidence informed coaching? Because sometimes I think people have this very rigid view that, oh, that means that you take a tool that has had a load of randomized controlled trials and away you go with it. But sometimes I always like the analogy of there's been no randomized controlled trials to show that jumping out of an aeroplane with a parachute is better than not jumping out of an aeroplane with a parachute, because it's unethical if you're in the control group. So yet we accept that because we've got a good theoretical understanding. So therefore we put it into practice. So what's kind of your take on what is evidence informed? What does it mean?
And we can generalize from other objects that we drop from aircraft and how they hit the ground without the parachute. So we can then generalize from that situation to what might happen to a human. And you're right, the ethics committee of my university and yours probably wouldn't sign off that as a research study. And I share your view that coaching in 30 years has really stayed at the level predominantly of practice. And that is really an area of sadness for me, that despite Tony Grant, myself, Stephen Palmer, others who have been advocating for a more robust evidence-based approach, really we have not moved very far. And as you say, well, it's only 30 years. I would say, yes, but look at how in 30 years cognitive behavioral therapy established a robust evidence-based. Look at motivational interviewing and how in a very similar period to coaching, it's established a very robust evidence-based. And I would come back to a blend of quantitative and qualitative studies. What we tend to get in coaching, really reflecting the fact that many of the studies are done by students, is qualitative studies, thematic analysis with 6 participants, and that makes up a large proportion of coaching journal publications. What we've seen less of is experimental design and randomized controlled trials. Randomized controlled trials are super difficult to do. They're really difficult to do. They're easier to do with students because particularly if you're in some parts of the world, you can give credits for that. You can use power and influence over your students to encourage them to engage in that. In the UK and in the European Union, we've seen less of that, but still there are quite a few student-based studies, fewer workplace studies, because employees are an absolute pain in the arse. You ask them to participate in the study and you say, it's okay, it's voluntary. So they go, okay, I won't do that because I'm really busy. And then even when they participate in the collection of data before the intervention, then they go and get another job, or they get promoted, or they leave, or they're off sick, or they go and have a baby. Oh my gosh. Okay. So that is terrible because the length of these studies is often quite long. So people change jobs, roles, responsibilities. And then when it gets to T2 to collect data, just like all employees, even if the organization is behind it, which is also a fundamental problem, that organizations are anxious about data and their employees. So even if they're behind it, then the employees don't always fill out the second questionnaire. So you see a drop off of 50, 60%. So suddenly it becomes super hard. You need to start off with 80 people just to end up with 30 completing it at the end of the study. And the other issue from organizations, apart from their concerns about data, is the parachute problem, as you articulated it, is, well, if we believe this is the right intervention that we're paying for, we don't want to have a control group. We want to put everybody through it who's in this sample target population. So we don't want this little group who are not benefiting from it. So that becomes an issue. So as a result, over the 20 years, we've seen about one study a year. Some people have suggested it's as high as 42. I think we're really at about 25. It depends how you define coaching, how you define organization, how you define randomized controlled trial. But some of those that have argued it's 40 plus coaching, they've included health-based coaching rather than organizational coaching, coaching with students, coaching in sports. So I've excluded all of those, and we're really looking at about 22, 25 studies. That's tiny for a 30-year history of coaching, and is an embarrassment for us who are academics in this sphere. But I acknowledge it's super difficult, which then leads us back into, well, let's do another qualitative study, because do you know what? We can get that published, and we find 6 people, they give us their opinions, we write it up, there you go. And there is value in qualitative. All of the quantitative studies have really focused on the outcome. So we've then got, we're now catching up with a number of meta-analysis studies, of which we've got 10 published for the 22 randomized controlled trials or so. So meta-analysis has become a very popular theme. But what we haven't explored, which goes to the center of what you're saying, is the aspect of process. What is coaching? What does it actually look like? So we have competency frameworks from professional bodies. How were they developed? Well, they've really been developed through a expert panel. You get a group of individuals in a pub, coffee house, meeting room. And certainly when it is in relation to one, I've described it as the founders basically wrote down what they did. They threw $20 into a hat. Then they suddenly made themselves the masters of coaching. If what they were doing, because they were the masters of coaching, this is what everybody else should do, then you train everybody in those techniques. Then when you review it, you go and ask the members of your body what works in their coaching practice. Well, no doubt they will tell you what they've been trained in. So then you repeat that cycle. There's no evidence that all of those behaviors, any of those behaviors, actually produce positive outcomes. So we've done very little, almost no analysis of the processes. Again, super complicated, but we could look at other approaches, other areas of practice to help us get a better understanding. And then that leads through to the next problem, is none of the coaching approaches are manualized. So even when you see a randomized controlled trial, they say they do coaching. But what coaching were you doing? Were you using the GROW model? Or were you using cognitive behavioral based coaching, or solution focused coaching, or psychodynamic? And that has led some writers in the coaching sphere to say all interventions are the same. Doesn't matter what you do, you get the same outcome.
Okay.
And that's my analogy of this, is then saying, well, yes, you can eat any food you like, then you're no longer hungry. So yes, you can go for a McDonald's, or you could have a quinoa salad, and both of them might give you a sense of being full. McDonald's is your choice, John. No. But we know that both of them carry very different impacts long term. If the only choice, the only food you have is McDonald's every day, that probably wouldn't be the healthiest choice. However, if you had a quinoa salad every day, maybe with some other bits of protein and some fruit and some nuts, etc., you're going to have a very healthy diet. So we need to understand the effects of different types of interventions. And I might argue that some types of interventions are better suited for some types of presenting problem. So that just as in your diet, certain foods will lead to certain outcomes. You have a high protein diet, it's going to help you build muscle. Whereas if you have a low fat diet, that's also going to have an effect on the body in a different way. And it depends on the goals that you're seeking to the diet or the intervention that you're going to choose to use.
And if I can continue that dietary analogy because I think it works really well. I because I sympathize with coaches in the same way that I sympathize with people who are constantly trying new diets because the while there might only be, X amount of good studies out there, the amount of information out there is astronomical. I'm not a big social media user, but even going on LinkedIn now and then is enough to go, wow, there's a lot out there of very, very varied quality. So much like someone who's trying a new diet every other week or something, you think, how can a coach know like what's legitimate here? Because this person has managed to, I don't know, attach it to an inspirational quote and photograph on a social media post. How can a coach tell if what they're reading and what they're being advised has integrity to it, which a lot of stuff does, or if it doesn't, which sadly also a lot of stuff falls into that category.
That's a great question, John. And what I describe as the problem of the Library of Babel. And the Library of Babel, unfortunately, is growing through generative AI. So it's now possible for anybody to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, type in a prompt, and by 6:15 have their LinkedIn post giving advice on what you should be doing in your coaching practice today, this week, this month. And so we're seeing an extraordinary growth in content generation. And what's good and what's not. You probably know the Library of Babel was a short story in which this library, this fictional library, has every book that has ever been written and every book that could ever be written. And it's looked after by a group of librarians, and they are searching wisdom and knowledge. But each book has been produced with a random set of letters. So most books contain complete nonsense. A few books have got lots of nonsense and the occasional sentence that is coherent, and a few of those are pearls of wisdom. But amongst the billions, trillions of books that are there is the complete works of Shakespeare, every book that could ever be written in the world. But the challenge, because all the books are in random order, is to find the pearls of wisdom amongst the plethora of that content. And we are creating that Library of Babel and generative AI. The internet has added to that, but generative AI is going to have a 1,000-time multiplier to what we've created now. The content is just growing exponentially. And most of it is twaddle and nonsense. It's certainly not evidence-based. And one example, last week, someone was writing for a book that I'm currently putting together at the moment. They sent it through. As the editor of the book, I read every chapter. And I read this and I looked at the references and it was citing something that I'd written. I thought, oh, that's very good. And then I realized, actually, I hadn't written this. So I went back and I said, have you generated this chapter from generative AI? Have you checked all the references are correct? And she said, oh, I haven't used generative AI. I got this reference from somewhere else that was then published. So what we're seeing is other people are using generative AI. They're then publishing their work, that publication with a false reference in it, because no one's checked it, then is picked up by somebody else. Because it's been published, they believe that that is true. They then carry it on. And then this chain continues to grow. And it becomes very difficult to go back to find where was the original source. Now, of course, if it's a cited reference, then we can go to the original source. And that's always what I would encourage people to do. In answer to your question, it's about, can I evidence this back to the original source as a published peer review? And then can I read that source and how reliable is it is? And I come back to the hierarchy of evidence. And at the top of that hierarchy are meta-analysis, systematic literature reviews, randomized controlled trials. And as we go down the pyramid, experimental design studies. And at the bottom of the pyramid might be Donald Trump's blog.
I think that's, yeah, I'd like to think that's deep in the basement somewhere.
And we've all got opinions, and that's okay. We want free speech, we want diversity of thought. But as we do that, that isn't evidence. That's just opinion. And we've all got opinions. I've got opinion about the shopkeeper who's down the road and what she's like, but it's not evidence. I've just got one experience. And actually, to make a judgment about whether that shopkeeper is honest or not, we would need better data than my personal experience of 3 years ago when I was shortchanged buying a pint of milk. That is not enough evidence.